Jeremy, it's
Okay.
been a while since we talked. I'm glad to see you doing well. I wanted to just go into a couple of topics that you want to discuss, and let's talk about the three topics that you had outlined. Um,
Okay. Well, the first one is Cajun versus Creole. What's it all about? What's a Cajun? What's a Creole? And I think we came up with an interesting little tagline, which is there are black Cajuns and white Creoles. Because I think in that one line, it kind of solves the question, and it kind of helps to shed some light on the misconceptions of the differences, or perhaps uncover the many similarities between so-called Cajuns and Creoles. So, my appreciation, I'm going to make this concise, easy. Every Cajun who had a child in Louisiana was a Creole and became a Creole the moment their child was born. So, for some confusion, what is a Cajun? A Cajun, the term Cajun comes from Acadian. Okay, so these Acadians were people who were in New France, so that's in Canada, and were expelled once the English took over from the French. They were expelled around 1755, and over the course of the next 20 years, they made their way all around the United States before finally settling in a friendly territory, which was Louisiana. And it was friendly mainly because it was under Spanish control, and the Spanish did not mind more Catholics in the area. The Acadians were not treated immediately or accepted immediately as welcome guests. They were kind of put on the outskirts of the city. In fact, I remember hearing one historical account that said that they were perfect for buffering Indian attacks. I found that kind of an unusual thing. But out of that, coming out of the outskirts of the city, they came into contact with Native Americans, came into contact with also some Creoles, these Creole being the people who were born in Louisiana who were not necessarily or not indigenous. So that included white people who were born in Louisiana. They were Creoles. They included people of African descent, enslaved and free. Those are Creoles. So the Acadians came into contact with these people very early on, came into contact with the Native Americans very early on, and really were quickly swept up into this colonial life because the landscape was quite different than where they came from. So they were quickly swept in.
and I mean, we need to get this straight. And I know people are going to see this and they're going to complain about this or have their issues. But Acadians were a very small number of people.
Very
They were
small.
assimilated into the Creole society. They were
Yeah.
assimilated, and they became part of the larger Creole community. And the Acadians and Acadia is a marketing tool that was brought out in the 60s and 70s to make Creoles more palatable and make them more of a profit center for Louisiana tourism. Now, we know that there are people that came from Acadia, or and
Right.
uh, and that's that we understand that, but they were assimilated into the larger Creole society. And so when we talk
Right.
about Creoles, we always do the same thing. We say
Right.
they're descendants of colonial settlers that were there before 1803, black,
Right.
white, Native American, mixtures of Native American, Spanish, French. They were pre-colonial descendants that lived in Louisiana. So Creoles, they speak French. They they are Catholics, overwhelmingly
Right.
Catholic. They live in Creole tradition. They have their own cuisine, and so those are kind of the litmus tests that we have for that. And Acadians, uh, uh, we probably should not say Acadians, but so-called Cajuns are Creoles.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Right. And everything's been rebranded to say what you were saying. Everything was sort of rebranded in the 1960s, 70s. Really, it really began to take hold with a celebrity chef, Paul Prudhomme or Prudhomme, who is an amazing chef whose legacy still prevails in the city of New Orleans, and he's respected as a very good chef. but he began to market his food as Cajun. And the reason why he did this is because he was from where my family grew up, the Opelousas area. And when he came to New Orleans, these New Orleans people kind of associated the term Creole with haute cuisine. So very high end, buttery, more Parisian
Hmm.
in theme and in flair, even though it did have some of our ingredients. I say our, I mean Louisiana ingredients. But so when they got Paul Prudhomme's food, they looked at it and they said, "This isn't Creole. It's something else." And he gravitated towards Cajun. And when we look at the word Cajun, we begin to examine that the word was not a friendly word and really was quite derogatory. It meant kind of low down.
Yeah,
But
country folk.
country, but not in an endearing way. We not in the way of,
Yeah,
oh, they're so country, like, oh, cool. No, like country, like, not the cousins you invite over for dinner.
right.
Those that kind of country. And so he adopted this term when really Cajun cuisine was country Creole cuisine. They were country Creoles. In
Yes.
fact, if you read in the books, you hear a lot of these high-end city folks in New Orleans talk about when their country cousins would come to visit, they would bring preserves, they would bring salted meats, they would bring all kinds of things that the city folks were just craving and excited for, especially during the social season. But it was different because they
Yes.
grew up in a different place with different ingredients. They ate differently and they developed a unique lifestyle. Even their homes
Right.
were a little different. So the style they call Acadian home is actually a Creole home
Right.
because the Acadians did not raise their house. If you go to Acadie, you will not see houses like you see in Louisiana. The
Mm.
Acadians were excellent blanket weavers, and that's because they had to keep warm during the winters. In Louisiana, our biggest problem is heat.
Hmm.
And so our homes, our even our meals are quite different than traditional fare in New Brunswick or those part Nova Scotia. You won't find this Creole cuisine or this Cajun so-called Cajun cuisine there, and that's because it didn't come from there. It came from here. Gumbo can't be Cajun. The word's African.
African
I mean,
jambalaya, same thing. Yeah.
it has roux, which is from the natives, from the Choctaws.
Hmm.
So all of this is part of that fusion. But when they began to rebrand all of this stuff as Cajun, everyone say this, it kind of widened it. And by that, the term, we've talked about this, but for those of y'all just tuning in, the word Creole has gone through several, I will not say definitions because it's always meant the same thing, but it's gone through some certain interpretations and it's certainly been people have struggled for the term. For a while, whites, especially after the Civil War, wanted to take Creole as their own. Said, look, if you have any sort of African blood, if you have any Negro blood, you can't be a Creole.
Can't be a Creole, and that was a revisionist history that was done by the Fortiers and um,
Gay
the
RAs,
gay
who,
arrays. Exactly. Those
who
are
had a
revisionists.
son who was a free man of color.
And we understand that, and we understand that in the context of this is that after Reconstruction, white people that had black kin had to put some separation between themselves and their black kin just to
Yeah,
survive. And so, they started to have this idea that okay, well, we're Creoles, but we got to have some separation between our black kin. So we're going to say that Creoles are only French and
right.
white, French speaking and white, and that gave them the separation that they needed from their black kin to survive Reconstruction and Jim Crow. So like you say, then in the '60s, Cajunization came to give everybody a little bit more separation. Right now,
Right.
we know that like I have white kin, they're Creoles. I don't consider them Cajuns. Now, and most of them don't consider themselves Cajuns. So we have a situation where that a word has been adopted and said over and over again and marketed um, to deceive a little bit and
Right.
to make a separation between races a little bit more definitive. And we know that that's not the way that we do things in Louisiana. So
Right, and exactly like you said, the word Cajun and Creole really, obviously, it's really a subtle way that people are trying to say those white people, those colored people over there,
Mhm.
even though that's not the case, and it's furthest from the truth. But yeah, it's a complicated issue, but it's something that we definitely have to address. That the word Creole, at one time it was perceived as this, and then the white people really just gave up on the
Mhm.
term after so many people associate the word Creole with mixed race people. The white people began to distance themselves.
Yeah,
And once
exactly.
they began to distance themselves from it, they looked for another term that claimed their French linguistic past and their Louisiana past. And some of them adopted the word Cajun when their ancestors were not from,
Arcadia.
Acadie
Yeah, they're not.
or
Yeah,
Acadia.
yeah.
And but and even if you do have some Acadian ancestry, which a lot of people do, most people, I would say a lot. I won't say most people. Many people who've been in Louisiana for a long time have some sort of contact with some Acadian ancestry because the Acadians assimilated.
Mm.
It's also important. Our friend, the historian John LaFleur, always talks about that the Acadians were Métis people, and they were a lot of them had Native ancestry, so Micmac ancestry. So these people came to Louisiana a little different, and they came different than what we perceive them as today. They were not as white as we imagine them. Today, they had native and indigenous roots, with the Micmacs, and it might have been why they did get along with the Indians and the Choctaw.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like I say, they had the same traits that we consider to be Creole: French-speaking,
Yeah,
Catholic, pre-1803. Any mixture that you see, white, black, Native American, any mixture thereof, Spanish, and so they fall into the category of Creoles. And I think that we need
right,
to keep reminding people that this is just a ploy to kind of create distance and to separate white and black Creoles.
right.
I consider it a separation of white and black Creoles because
That's really
now
that's what it is.
the people that are out in the country, yeah, they did not speak high French. They did not
No.
learn French in school, maybe like the folks that were in the city of New Orleans. But
Yeah, well, a lot of them didn't have access to Paris, in these country settings. Some of them did, the wealthy planters' children, but most of them were not, close to Paris like that.
yeah, yeah, and they didn't have that. I mean, we've talked about in several of our conversations. Lots of Creoles from New Orleans went back and forth to Paris on numerous occasions, and they
Oh, yeah,
brought back the culture with them, and they were into high culture. I mean, the Creoles in New Orleans were class conscious. They were very
right.
conscious about the class of people that they hung out with, and that unfortunately is part of what New Orleans is about. So
Right. And so for people who are tuning in and you visit in New Orleans and you see a sign that says Cajun Cooking, they're lying.
exactly, exactly.
Okay, they're lying, and really they're not lying. They're playing up the marketing gimmick. They're using that word. They're capitalizing on it because of misconceptions, because of the confusion. Cajun cuisine is country Creole cuisine.
Yes.
That's it.
And let's
That's it.
and you know something? Let's just leave it. And you know something? We can talk about Zydeco music. Well, Zydeco music is country Creole music.
It is. So here's the deal with Zydeco. Zydeco is really just influenced by more of the R&B and some of the jazz aspects. I would say more R&B. But if you listen to early Creole music or what is considered early Cajun music, it's all the same music. From the 1920s, these so-called Cajun artists were friends with these Creole artists. When I'm saying Cajun, I'm saying would have retrospectively been called Cajun.
Hmm.
It's the same music. It was all called Creole La La music. And
Yeah.
as time progressed, the white Creoles began to be influenced by country music, and their music changed a little bit. And the Creoles of color were more influenced by R&B and somewhat jazz. And you see that division in music growing with a different with cultures, cultural what they were exposed to, but it's the same origins.
And you know something, Jeremy? It's like the Sunday dinner. Sometimes you go visit your country folks out in Plaquemines Parish and some of these outlying parishes, and and what do? They're playing music, they're having their food, and they're mixing, and things are coming back, are moving back and forth between the city and the outskirts of the city, and it's just a
Right.
natural progression of things, and we need to accept that and use our common sense about this. I'm saying people need to use their common sense about this. When we have the Acadians that actually came to New Orleans, they're a
Right.
very small percentage of the people that were there. They didn't
Right.
take over. They didn't create a culture there. The culture was already there. They assimilated into the culture that was there, and we need to recognize that. So, um,
And most of the restaurants you see that are called Cajun today actually come from people who came to New Orleans from the Lafayette area, from St. Landry. And those areas, while they have been renamed, Evangeline or Acadiana, traditionally were Creole. That's where all the Creole, the Prairie Creoles were.
yeah,
My family.
you know the renaming of those areas called Acadiana
Right.
is just a ploy. I mean that's I mean I could call them I could call them Mississippi if we want to, right? But
Right. Wouldn't change the
that's a
history.
yeah. What, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change
Right.
the history behind it. It's just a name that's used to like I say, try to make a little more distance between the reality that we have. So
Right. And before people get mad and start yelling at the screen and sending hate mail, we're all on the same side. We all belong to the history of Louisiana. We need to fight for the same cause, no matter what you look like, and we all borrowed something from each other. What I'm saying, it's impossible to tell me what I borrowed. It's impossible for you to tell me what you borrowed because we were all so close together.
right, right.
So that's that's that.
And like I say, the only thing that really that broke that up was the Americans coming to
Yeah.
Louisiana, and then we had after Reconstruction we had Jim Crow. That
Right.
really broke thing. That really fractured the Creole community in numerous ways. I mean,
Yes.
so we need to own that and absolutely understand how that came to be. So we're never gonna hear the end of this, Jeremy.
Never gonna hear the end of it, and somebody's gonna get all upset and talk about their grandma told them all of this. It's fine.
I know. And you know something? I'll tell you a classic story, and then we'll end with this. I had a I had a relative who was a white relative who married a woman of color inside the city of New Orleans,
Okay.
and he had several children with her. And then he moved out to Plaquemines Parish, and he married a woman named Scholastique Guidry, right? And he actually married this woman. He physically married her. He had a common law marriage with this woman of color in New Orleans, right? And so um, what those people out in Plaquemines Parish were told was that they were Cajun, but they were told that in the 60s and 70s, right? Up
Okay.
until the 60s and 70s, they thought they were Creoles. But in the 60s and 70s, when this whole Cajunization thing happened, they were told, "Oh yeah, we're part Cajun." Well, what happened was this: after the 60s and 70s, people that were in Plaquemines Parish who were had the same last name as the people of color, the Creoles of color who were living in the city of New Orleans, started running into each other, and they started saying, "Well, wait a second. Your name is Antoine Angeletti. Well, my father's name is Antoine Angeletti. How could?" But so one person would say, "Well, I can't be related to you because I'm a Cajun."
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
what we find out after all this is that we have this same ancestor who has two families, white and black, brought up in Creole tradition, pre 1803,
Hmm.
French speaking, Catholic. He checks all the boxes as being a Creole,
Right.
but to make separation with his white and black family, he puts that story out there that they're Cajuns, which is
Right.
completely false. So there's a
Right.
perfect example of the situation that we have. So I'm sorry, Jeremy. I mean, like I said, we're going to get hate mail about this. So
Well, yeah, and don't be hateful, and don't bring up that there's a Cajun language in this.
yeah,
There is a bunch of different versions, and not even versions, but patois and of French in
dialects of French.
Louisiana.
Yeah, and
None of them tie back to Cajun French in the sense of, that's exclusive to this. So many of them use native words, Choctaw words. It's a Creole language we speak. It doesn't matter if you're from Ville Platte, if you still speak French in New Orleans, if you're from Opelousas, you might not understand certain words, but all of those languages are a product of colonial Louisiana.
yeah, okay, okay. So
So let's move on
let's move
before
on. Let's move on.
I think that was enough.
No, we never get enough of that, do we?
I know, I know. We're going to do a part two on this. I can
I
tell you
know. I can
that.
tell. Go ahead. Go ahead. So what was the
So,
second? The second thing we
so
wanted to talk
speaking
about?
of misconceptions about Cajuns and Creoles, uh, we should talk about our next point, which is again something that persists no matter what we show, what gets dug up, and more records are getting digitized by the day. And even Louisiana's colonial records have been digitized and are accessible on the internet. Ancestry, I think for a while now, you've been able to look at the secession records
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
this
Mhm.
right. Plessage. So a reoccurring story where people claim that the way all of these Creoles of color came into existence is by being the children of illegitimate relationships by either enslaved women, which in some cases we cannot deny that there were some cases of enslaved women who had relationships, or whether it was voluntary or not voluntary relationships, but also the persistent plissage where there's this idea of women who are basically the mistresses of wealthy white men in the city of New Orleans. That is specifically what we're referring to with the term plissage.
Okay.
You want to begin with this, or
Well, Jeremy, like I say, um, women in New Orleans had a certain freedom that needs to be recognized. And one of the freedoms that they had was sexual freedom. Now there were women who had relationships outside of the sanctity of marriage. New
no?
Orleans is an open city and a big city, and so there was a variety of choices that women made, and at times they did live with white suitors.
Sure.
Now they a lot of relationships is just in general in New Orleans were done through a notary public, and the notary public did that for several reasons. First off, there was a rule of law in New Orleans that was a lot different than the American colonies. Now, for instance, free people of color could sue whites and win
Right.
judgments against them, and so they can make legally binding contracts with white people. Um, where in other states in colonial United States, they were not able to do that. So women entered into, I would say, contractual relationships at times
Mhm.
with men for support. I think that
Right.
that's very true.
And
But
even through marriage, women could own property.
even through
So
marriage, and
right.
and
So there's
and
the
and I'll give you the perfect example of that. In my
okay.
family, um, one of my third great aunt married a man, a free man of color. They had a notary public notarized their relationship. Now they got married in the sanctity of the church, but the notary public was used to separate the land that she brought with her to the relationship versus the land that they owned or that he owned separately and that they owned together. And so if their union ever broke up, they had a legally binding document that showed what was
Outline.
brought to the
Yeah.
table.
Right.
Plain and simple as that.
It's
So,
common. It's common. It's like today, people who enter with prenuptial agreements and everything like that. It's essentially what it is. And to touch on what I said earlier, I wanted to make a declaration that there were, in fact, of course, women of African descent who were enslaved, who were taken advantage of, and they did have many of these women who were, raped, had children. So I don't want to dispute that or seem like I'm saying, well, that's not what happened.
Hmm.
What I'm saying is that in regards to free women of color had more abilities in Louisiana and legal rights than in most places. They had the ability to own property. They had the ability to essentially be, for all intents and purposes, I hate to say white citizens because, of course, they were not
Hmm.
respected in that manner, but they had freedoms that were protected that it didn't exist in other places in the United States. So they did not need a white suitor to take care of them. And what we have found recently, and I say recently, but more and more of, is that most of these free women of color really went with free men of color, a large number of them.
And they
So, and
married free men of color. And the reason that they married free men of color was that free men of color were prosperous, of the same class, um,
right,
from families that they knew, and it makes perfect sense that they would marry free men of color. And looking at New Orleans historically, you'll see that free men of color were the movers and shakers, entrepreneurs,
right.
artisans, laborers. They were in every facet of New Orleans. They were involved in some way, shape, or form, and so
From
they were
opera
prosperous
to real
individuals.
estate.
And it only makes sense that women of color and women of means would be attracted to them. Plain and simple as that. I mean, that's
Right. And this not to say that certain women of color did not form relationships with white men and European Creoles or European men. We see this. I mean, we see relationships, and the reality is, a lot of them had lifelong relationships with these men, and
mhm,
sometimes just in life today, the relationships did not work out. I mean, and there was little legal recourse for that because they were not protected under marriage.
right.
But as a whole, we see most women of color, descending from free men of color, marrying into free men of color. And this idea of quadrant balls is complete fiction. The wealthiest men in the city, some of the wealthiest men in the city, were free men of color. They could have easily sent their daughter to France or
Hmm.
Spain or anywhere else.
And
They did
did
not have to auction them
yeah,
off.
they did. They did. I mean, yeah,
And they did. We
yeah.
see instances of women of color leaving for Mexico, leaving for France. I was recently doing a property search recently, and a free woman of color died. And the property search, it said that she died abroad. She died in France, but still had all these properties in New Orleans. So
Hmm.
here she is collecting rent, and of course, living in Paris. And of course, her husband was a free man of color, as was her father,
Hmm.
as was her child.
Yeah.
So.
And you know something, we need to continue to just dispel this sort of mystique. It's a made up thing.
Right.
And we need to stop propagating the idea that this happened.
Right,
Now,
and to clarify, we are saying that the institution of plissage, this socially accepted, as Wikipedia says, as other people say, socially accepted institution called plissage, not happening. It's not a word that existed in that way in the 19th century. It's an Anglo invention. It is something that the Anglos came and they reported because it was sensational. Storyville, Madam sensationalized on it.
hmm,
Such tales of quadrooms and octoroons and even having balls in Storyville were all part of that marketing, that capitalism, just
yeah.
like the Cajun
And,
restaurants in New
and
Orleans.
and you know something? It's a perfect explanation of to explain away why white men were living with women of color.
It,
Right?
it, it was a way of for a lot of people to say, oh, well, that's why they did that.
That's why
That's
they
why
did that, right? And
they
you
did
can't.
it because they preferred it.
Right, right. And exactly explains the way that that white suitors might prefer women of color,
But
right?
listen, again, here's my disclaimer for tonight. Don't get mad. before you get mad and before you break the screen, I want you to go on Ancestry.com. I want you to start looking up free women of color. I want you to start looking at secession records and watch all of these women who had white suitors. Watch how they acknowledge their natural children in their succession. It'll say so and so acknowledges his son, HDCL, homme de couleur libre. That's free man of color, as the executor of his estate. You even see in property records Veuve Durrell, for instance, Veuve Durrell, Widow Durrell. And this is odd. So she's a free woman of color, Widow Durrell, yet they weren't legally married. But here it is on a record, an official record. They call her the widow of the white man.
Yeah. And
So
so,
that's not
so what you're saying is a good thing. Don't take our word for it. Do the
look it
research
up.
and look it up. That's exactly right. Look it up. If you
Right, and don't go and watch an HBO or Showtime series on it. I'm not dogging HBO or Showtime. But I'm saying look it up yourself. A movie is a movie, and facts are facts. Movies
Yeah,
embellish, and that's part of the entertainment value.
yeah, yeah. And so that kind of leads us on to this next subject
Okay.
about some of the sensational stuff that's gone on. I know we wanted to talk about some things that are missing from New Orleans, right?
Right.
So Jeremy, I know that you find art and artifacts all over the place.
Right.
Um, and I'm in search, but I'm not as lucky as you are about some of these things. Like I say, I always say you fall ass backwards into these things, but um, it is really important that we start. Um, I want to say notifying people and getting them to understand that there are treasures that are outside of New Orleans that we need to acknowledge and find, right?
Right. So we brought up Reconstruction, and this is after. So for those of you who are just tuning in, who are just getting into this history, Reconstruction is what began what was a hopeful endeavor after the Civil War to integrate people of color and white into this. I won't say utopia, but a good system. And it completely did not work. It was abandoned, and the South just was left in shambles. And what happened was racism prevailed again. And soon every aspect of hope for people of color really just it failed. Everything with segregation, Jim Crow,
Hmm.
and all that. So with this came another diaspora of people, especially of people of African descent, Creoles, where everybody began to, I won't say everybody, a large majority of people left. And they left the South for better opportunities. Many of them went up north. They crossed the color line. Um, Others married into with other people of African descent, and they are all over the country. They are in
They're in
California,
Texas, California. A huge population of free people of color lived in Pasadena, San
mhm,
Bernardino, and LA. Now there are
Illinois.
many Creoles of color that are there, and some of those families came right like you exactly when you say right after Reconstruction, in
Right.
the 1880s, 1890s.
Even
They
up to 1920s and 30s. People
Mhm.
moved all over, and some even moved out of the country. So what we're doing by bringing this up is we're saying, have you heard that your grandmother was from Louisiana? Have you heard that y'all have Creole ancestry? Ask your people where they're from. Ask your mama where her people are from.
Mhm.
I wanted to show a couple pictures, and these were just recently found by me. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, I can see that. That's a nice picture.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a beautiful picture. This is from the 1880s. Let's see. This one's a little later. This one
Yeah,
is one of my
that looks like the
absolute favorites.
20s, right? Yeah.
This one's earlier, 1880s, 1890s. Dallier, of course,
Hmm.
was a favorite photographer. Look at that. I love this picture. It
Yeah.
doesn't get better than that. Sophistication, beautiful. These were found in Milwaukee. Okay. So from New Orleans to Milwaukee. And
Hmm.
I bought about 30 of them. Somebody had acquired them. I don't know what happened to the family, but I bought these. These are jewels because these are actually labeled on the back.
Oh,
And
wow.
And so I was able to find a family. I was able to find out that some of these people were related to my aunt and my first cousins. These are the cousins of my first cousins. So what we're trying to say is there are treasures out there. There are photographs. Some of the greatest men in New Orleans, Creoles of color, who started the civil rights movement. We have no pictures of them
Hmm.
because their families picked up and left. So
And
we're
let's name them. Let's name them. Let's name them.
all right.
Let's
You
name them.
go ahead.
So I'll let you name the two that I don't name. All right.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Okay.
hopefully I'll get it. All right.
So Paul Trevine. Paul Trevine is
Okay.
a relative of mine. There is no picture of Paul Trevine. He was the editor of La Union and the Tribune. He was a civil rights activist. He brought a Trevine versus Board of Education against segregation in New Orleans schools. A teacher at the Marie Couvent School, and just a civil rights activist from the Civil War. His father was a veteran of the War of 1812. He served in the Civil War in the or the, the two battalions of free men of color, and
Hmm.
I want to say the 10th Cavalry, but I might have that wrong. But the black Louisiana soldiers, and then afterwards was an activist and an editor and author and just an outstanding human being. Um,
Right.
so he's not there now. Another person that we know is J.B. Rudnay, right?
Right.
One of the founders of the Union and Tribune, first black newspaper in the United States. No picture of him. Now there's lots of pictures of Charles Rudnay, who's his brother, but J.B. Rudnay,
Right.
not a picture of him. I've never seen a picture of him. So those are two. I'm gonna let you name a couple because I know you.
Okay. And Homer Plessy, the famous Plessy versus Ferguson. We have no picture of Homer Plessy. This man was incredibly important. Surely there are many photographs. And look, those photographs of this man could be in your family's album. So if you're watching from Texas, don't just say, oh, well, we don't have that. Trust me, ask your mama, ask your grandmother. A lot of people don't know what they have in these because if they knew, they would be on the internet and we would know about them.
Mm-hmm,
So it doesn't matter where you are in the United States. If you think you have some Louisiana ancestry, you got some roots in New Orleans or Louisiana, ask your family. You could be holding valuable treasures. And I don't mean just valuable in the sense of monetary. I mean something much more important than that. I mean a cultural treasure that
mm-hmm,
is really that's something that will could be in textbooks to teach children to teach people about our history.
mm-hmm.
So we've got to reclaim. You wrote a book. We wrote a participating article about
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
claiming this artifacts. We've got to do it. The reason why these museums for so long would not include pieces that pertain to our history, and now they are looking actively, a little late, for
Mm-hmm.
pieces. We got to get these pieces in museums. We got to share them because we got to tell our story. Because if we don't do it, no one will.
And one thing I'm going to say to that is this, that there are many people out there who passed over the color line, past the color line, and they hid any contact they had with black culture, and there was a
Right.
reason for that. We understand that. We understand the reasons, and people made some very tough choices to separate themselves from families and everything like that. But those people, those now people that consider themselves to be white people and if they have Louisiana roots, they may have some of these treasures. They may have some of these pictures. Um, there's a lot of history of people that have thought that they were white, and then discovered at some point when a relative died, looking through their chest, that they're of color. They were a
Right.
color
They have
relative.
some Creole roots and
Right.
Creole color roots. I met some. I was fortunate enough to meet some cousins recently. Great people who didn't know much about their Louisiana history, and these cousins were just really great. It was so great to meet them. But they have, they had pictures and they had all kinds of things that were important to our Louisiana history, and they didn't know it because for them it's just an old picture
Hmm.
or something, something like that. But the reality is these pictures are rare of Creoles of color, and they're rare because of the reasons we talked about, because so many people went here, went there, and they were split up, and their relevance has been lost because it's no longer in Louisiana.
Hmm.
The context has been lost. So ask your mama, ask your uncle, ask your grandma, make some phone
Please.
calls. I mean, I'm serious. Just ask. Do you have any old pictures? Can you tell me about our family history? Because y'all could be sitting on something that is extraordinarily important, that will inspire and elevate, and that's a wonderful thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
The
Yeah.
magic of the internet.
Yeah. So like yeah, that we should leave it with that because I mean, to for us it's vitally important. I mean, I'm a historian. I thrive on that, but it's something that we can share with everybody, and
Right.
it's important to put to the faces to some of these deeds that were done. There were, I mean, I consider New Orleans to be the cradle of the civil rights movement. I mean,
It was.
whether people want to, you can dispute that or not. I don't care, but I say the first off the history that the Creoles of color had with having rights to begin with, and that they always were stretching those rights. When the Civil War came, they definitely stretched those rights. They were advocating for abolition of slavery, starting newspapers about abolition of slavery. They have a 1,000-man petition that they delivered to
Right.
Lincoln and Congress in 1864. 1,000 Creoles of color signed that and
And
sent
we're gonna
emissaries
add a
to
link.
Lincoln. Yeah,
We're gonna add a link to that. Correct.
right. And yeah, I'll add a link to that. And then Lincoln sent emissaries to New Orleans to meet with these guys. I mean, that's just how important they were to what was going on as far as getting the black vote. And so then when you start thinking about that, you say, okay, well now you're saying, okay, now we have Paul Trevini, the Board of Education, suing the Louisiana Board of Education. Well, that's the precursor to Brown versus um, the Board of Education in 1954. That's a precursor to that, right? And so then we have the Plessy case. That's one of the most important cases in the United States. I mean, that's that's
Right.
that's a pivotal moment in the United States, separate but equal. So that was those came out of New Orleans. Um, so when we start thinking about this, um, we need to start thinking, for us, it's vitally important that we get these, that we want to be able to have pictures and mementos of these people that did all these
Right.
fantastic, brave things. But also that we need to encourage people to share the information that they have. Some people have tremendous stories that they're not sharing for
Hey,
whatever.
we'll take anonymous pictures if you don't if
Yeah.
you don't see who you are. It's not a problem. Share it because we do have a lot of white cousins who are not interested in getting mixed up in this. And this is about the material culture. This is about saving our culture and sharing this story.
Mhm.
So really, these are not just pictures. These are this is history.
This history, yeah,
This is face to face with history.
yeah, it's a piece of history, and yeah, that's what I'm saying,
Right.
like I say, museums are calling out for these pieces now. I mean,
Right.
and people like you, Jeremy, that are experts on this. I mean, they're trying to find you and try to, and we need to promote that as much as possible. So, um,
Right.
I'm on my soapbox, but that's it.
No, no, it's fine. It's
Yeah.
fine.
And so Jeremy, we're a little bit over time. Is
Okay.
there anything else you want to say? Did I?
I have nothing else to say except for before you get mad about anything we said in this video, just go ahead and look it up. And if you disagree with something and if we were wrong with something, send a polite email. We'll read it. If it's rude, it's going in my junk box. But if it's polite, we'll read it and we'll discuss it because I'm interested in learning and teaching. So, we're interested in discussions. This can be a dialogue. That's the wonderful thing about the internet. Just try to be polite.
You,
Why
you,
not?
you know something, Jeremy? A well thought out disagreement is welcome.
Yeah, and enlightening often.
It is, and it will be enlightening. Yeah, and so a well thought out, well written rebuttal to anything that we have to say. Yeah, we want to have that conversation. We need to have that conversation. We need to have that
Right.
conversation, and it's not doesn't hurt any. We're not gonna get our feelings hurt. But if you want to, write something stupid, then we're gonna kind of ignore you.
Yeah.
But
I just,
but
yeah.
yeah, let's. I mean, please, if you have information that we didn't cover that you think that is vitally important, write us a note. And
Yeah. If you want to share family history, if you want to
yeah,
share anything you have, please do.
yeah, yeah. So let's do it. Let's do that. Jeremy, always a pleasure. Um,
Okay.
we're
You
gonna talk
always,
again soon. We need to do this more often, actually. But
yeah, we need to. We need to.
all right. I'll let you go, and we'll talk again soon. All right.
All right.
Take
Thank
care.
you.